1887, New Mexico Territory, when the tribal council chose Sarah Whitehorse, the poorest girl in the Apache camp with nothing but rags and a reputation for clumsiness, to be sent as a bride to the ruthless cowboy everyone warned would send her back in shame within a week. They expected her to return humiliated and broken. Instead, 6 months later, she rode back through the village gates wearing fine clothes, carrying legal papers, and bearing a new surname that made every jaw drop. But what could a penniless Apache girl, with no dowry, no beauty by their standards, and no prospects possibly have done to not only survive that test, but come back with everything they said she'd never have? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind cut through the Apache settlement like a knife, carrying with it the whispers of a decision that would change everything. Sarah Whitehorse sat outside her grandmother's cramped shelter, mending a hole in her only dress for the 3rd time that month. Her fingers were calloused and rough, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned early that nothing in life came easy. At 19, Sarah was considered past marriageable age by the standards of her people. Not that anyone had come calling. Her father had died when she was 7, killed in a skirmish with settlers. Her mother had followed 2 winters later, taken by fever. Since then, Sarah had survived on the charity of her aging grandmother and whatever work she could find, tanning hides, hauling water, doing the tasks that other women considered beneath them. The tribal council was meeting in the large lodge at the center of the settlement. Sarah could see the smoke rising from the opening at the top, could hear the low murmur of male voices discussing matters far above her station. She thought nothing of it. Council business never concerned people like her. Sarah Whitehorse. The voice of Running Bear, one of the senior council members, shattered the quiet afternoon. He stood at the entrance of the lodge, his weathered face unreadable, Sarah's hands stilled on the fabric. She looked up, confused. Women were rarely summoned to council meetings, and never women of her low standing. The council wishes to speak with you. Now, her grandmother emerged from the shelter, her ancient eyes sharp with concern. What is this about? Running Bear's expression gave nothing away. She will learn inside. Sarah's heart hammered as she set down her mending and stood. Her dress, patched and faded, suddenly felt even more threadbare. She was acutely aware of the dirt under her fingernails, the fact that her hair was simply braided with no ornaments, that her moccasins had holes she'd stuffed with dried grass. The inside of the council lodge was thick with smoke and tension. 7 men sat in a semicircle, their faces illuminated by the central fire. Chief Grey Wolf sat at the center, his presence commanding despite his advancing years. To his right was Thomas Blackfeather, the wealthiest man in their settlement, his multiple turquoise necklaces catching the firelight. Sarah Whitehorse, Chief Grey Wolf began, his voice formal. "We have a proposition for you." Sarah kept her eyes lowered respectfully, though her mind raced. "A proposition? For her?" 3 days ago, the chief continued, we received a message from the cattleman who owns the land bordering our eastern territory. His name is James Crawford. Perhaps you have heard of him? Sarah had. Everyone had. Crawford was a legend in these parts, a former cavalry scout turned rancher who had carved out a massive cattle empire in the harsh New Mexico territory. The stories about him varied wildly. Some said he was fair but ruthless. Others claimed he had a violent temper and no patience for Indians. All agreed on one thing: he was powerful, and it was better to stay on his good side. Crawford has made an unusual request, Running Bear interjected, his tone carefully neutral. He has asked for a bride from our people, an Apache woman to marry in the white man's way, with papers and ceremony. Sarah's head snapped up despite herself. A bride? Why would a wealthy white rancher want an Apache bride? Thomas Blackfeather leaned forward, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. The council has discussed this matter extensively. This could be an opportunity to strengthen relations with Crawford. His goodwill protects us from many troubles with other settlers. We have decided, Chief Grey Wolf said slowly, to send you, Sarah Whitehorse. The words hit her like a physical blow. They were sending her to marry a white rancher. I don't understand, Sarah managed, her voice barely a whisper. You don't need to understand, Blackfeather said dismissively. You need only to obey. This is an honor. Thomas, the chief cut him off with a sharp look before returning his attention to Sarah. His eyes held something she couldn't quite read. Pity? Regret? You will travel to the Crawford Ranch tomorrow. You will present yourself as a potential bride. If Crawford accepts you, you will marry him according to white man's law. 1887, New Mexico Territory. When the tribal council chose Sarah Whitehorse, the poorest girl in the Apache camp with nothing but rags and a reputation for clumsiness, to be sent as a bride to the ruthless cowboy everyone warned would send her back in shame within a week. They expected her to return humiliated and broken. Instead, 6 months later, she rode back through the village gates wearing fine clothes, carrying legal papers and bearing a new surname that made every jaw drop. But what could a penniless Apache girl with no dowry, no beauty by their standards, and no prospects possibly have done to not only survive that test, but come back with everything they said she'd never have? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind cut through the Apache settlement like a knife, carrying with it the whispers of a decision that would change everything. Sarah Whitehorse sat outside her grandmother's cramped shelter, mending a hole in her only dress for the 3rd time that month. Her fingers were calloused and rough, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned early that nothing in life came easy. At 19, Sarah was considered past marriageable age by the standards of her people. Not that anyone had come calling. Her father had died when she was 7, killed in a skirmish with settlers. Her mother had followed 2 winters later, taken by fever. Since then, Sarah had survived on the charity of her aging grandmother and whatever work she could find, tanning hides, hauling water, doing the tasks that other women considered beneath them. The tribal council was meeting in the large lodge at the center of the settlement. Sarah could see the smoke rising from the opening at the top, could hear the low murmur of male voices discussing matters far above her station. She thought nothing of it. Council business never concerned people like her. Sarah Whitehorse. The voice of Running Bear, one of the senior council members, shattered the quiet afternoon. He stood at the entrance of the lodge, his weathered face unreadable, Sarah's hands stilled on the fabric. She looked up, confused. Women were rarely summoned to council meetings, and never women of her low standing. The council wishes to speak with you. Now, her grandmother emerged from the shelter, her ancient eyes sharp with concern. What is this about? Running Bear's expression gave nothing away. She will learn inside. Sarah's heart hammered as she set down her mending and stood. Her dress, patched and faded, suddenly felt even more threadbare. She was acutely aware of the dirt under her fingernails, the fact that her hair was simply braided with no ornaments, that her moccasins had holes she'd stuffed with dried grass. The inside of the council lodge was thick with smoke and tension. 7 men sat in a semicircle, their faces illuminated by the central fire. Chief Grey Wolf sat at the center, his presence commanding despite his advancing years. To his right was Thomas Blackfeather, the wealthiest man in their settlement, his multiple turquoise necklaces catching the firelight. Sarah Whitehorse, Chief Grey Wolf began, his voice formal. We have a proposition for you. Sarah kept her eyes lowered respectfully, though her mind raced. A proposition? For her? 3 days ago, the chief continued, we received a message from the cattleman who owns the land bordering our eastern territory. His name is James Crawford. Perhaps you have heard of him? Sarah had. Everyone had. Crawford was a legend in these parts, a former cavalry scout turned rancher who had carved out a massive cattle empire in the harsh New Mexico territory. The stories about him varied wildly. Some said he was fair but ruthless. Others claimed he had a violent temper and no patience for Indians. All agreed on one thing: he was powerful, and it was better to stay on his good side. Crawford has made an unusual request, Running Bear interjected, his tone carefully neutral. He has asked for a bride from our people, an Apache woman to marry in the white man's way, with papers and ceremony. Sarah's head snapped up despite herself. A bride? Why would a wealthy white rancher want an Apache bride? Thomas Blackfeather leaned forward, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. The council has discussed this matter extensively. This could be an opportunity to strengthen relations with Crawford. His goodwill protects us from many troubles with other settlers. We have decided, Chief Grey Wolf said slowly, to send you, Sarah Whitehorse. The words hit her like a physical blow. They were sending her to marry a white rancher. I don't understand, Sarah managed, her voice barely a whisper. You don't need to understand, Blackfeather said dismissively. You need only to obey. This is an honor. Thomas, the chief cut him off with a sharp look before returning his attention to Sarah. His eyes held something she couldn't quite read. Pity? Regret? You will travel to the Crawford Ranch tomorrow. You will present yourself as a potential bride. If Crawford accepts you, you will marry him, according to white man's law. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By midday, Sarah's feet ached despite her sturdy moccasins. The sun beat down mercilessly and dust coated her throat. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, her mind turning over everything she knew about James Crawford. The stories were contradictory and confusing. Old Miguel at the trading post had once said Crawford was a fair man who paid honest wages to anyone willing to work hard, regardless of their blood. But Jenny Hawkins, whose husband worked as a ranch hand nearby, claimed Crawford had a temper like a lightning strike and ruled his land with an iron fist. Sarah's cousin had heard he was a drinker who spent his nights in the saloon in town. Yet Father Martinez from the mission insisted Crawford donated generously to the church and never missed Sunday service. Who was the real James Crawford? And why did a man who could have any woman in the territory want an Apache bride? They reached the boundary of Crawford land in the late afternoon. A wooden fence stretched across the landscape, well-maintained and sturdy. Beyond it, Sarah could see cattle grazing in the distance, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The ranch was even larger than the rumors suggested. Marcus stopped his horse and pointed to a dirt road that led deeper into Crawford property. Follow that road. It will take you to the main house. 5 miles, maybe 6. Sarah looked at the long road ahead, then back at Marcus. His face was carefully blank, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. He didn't expect her to make it. He probably expected Crawford to send her away before she even reached the front door. Thank you for guiding me, Sarah said simply. Marcus nodded once, then wheeled his horse around and rode back the way they had come, raising a cloud of dust. Sarah watched him disappear, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and began walking along Crawford's road. The ranch was impressive even from a distance. As Sarah walked, she passed corrals filled with fine horses, barns that looked newly built, and vast pastures where cattle grazed contentedly. Ranch hands worked in the fields, and several looked up curiously as she passed. A few called out greetings in Spanish or English, but Sarah kept her eyes forward and maintained her steady pace. The main house came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was larger than any dwelling Sarah had ever seen, a sprawling structure of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Real glass windows caught the dying light. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. Sarah's steps slowed as she approached. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment. Once she knocked on that door, everything would change. She thought about turning back. She could tell the council that Crawford had rejected her sight unseen, that she'd never even made it to the house. Who would know? Who would care? But no. She had come this far, and she had made herself a promise in the darkness last night. Sarah climbed the 3 steps to the porch, her worn moccasins silent on the wood planks. She raised her hand to knock on the heavy wooden door. Before her knuckles could connect, the door swung open. A woman stood in the doorway, Mexican, perhaps in her 50s, with steel-grey hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a clean apron over a practical dress, and her dark eyes swept over Sarah with the efficiency of someone used to sizing people up quickly. "See?" the woman said, one eyebrow raised. "I am Sarah Whitehorse," Sarah said, surprised. Her voice came out steady. "I was sent by my people to see James Crawford." The woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or was it pity? "You are the Apache girl." It wasn't a question. "I'm Rosa Delgado. I manage this household." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come inside. Senor Crawford is not yet here, but he is expected soon." "You will wait?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment before stepping over the threshold. The interior of the house was even more overwhelming than the exterior. Polished wood floors gleamed under her feet. Real furniture, not rough-hewn benches but actual chairs with cushions, filled the large room. Paintings hung on the walls. A stone fireplace dominated one end of the room, with a fire already crackling despite the warmth of the day. This was wealth. Real, substantial wealth. Rosa's sharp eyes took in Sarah's worn clothing, her dusty moccasins, the small bundle she carried. "You walked here?" "Yes." "From the Apache settlement?" "Yes." Rosa made a small sound that might have been disapproval or might have been sympathy. "Come, you will wash and have something to eat while you wait. You cannot meet Senor Crawford looking like you crawled through the desert." She led Sarah through the house to a small room off the kitchen. A basin of clean water sat on a stand, with actual soap beside it, store-bought soap that smelled of lavender. Clean towels hung on a rack. It was more luxury than Sarah had seen in her entire life. "Wash," Rosa commanded. "I will bring you food." Alone in the small room, Sarah stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the basin. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat. Her braid had come partially undone during the long walk. Her dress looked even worse in the light of this clean, orderly house, every patch and stain painfully visible. She washed slowly, methodically, trying to make herself as presentable as possible. She rebraided her hair and added her grandmother's beaded clasp, the only beautiful thing she owned. It helped, but not much. Rosa returned with a plate of warm tortillas, beans, and some kind of meat Sarah didn't recognize. "Eat," she said, setting it on a small table. "Who knows when you last had a proper meal?" "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. Rosa studied her for a long moment. "Why did they send you?" The question was blunt, almost cruel, but Sarah appreciated the honesty. "Because they expect me to fail." Rosa's eyebrows rose slightly. "At least someone was speaking the truth in this house. And what do you expect?" Sarah met the older woman's eyes. "I expect to surprise them." For the first time, Rosa's stern expression cracked slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "Eat your food, child. Senor Crawford will be here soon, and then we will see what surprises the evening brings." As Sarah ate, she heard the sound of horses outside, the low voices of men, the creak of leather and jingle of spurs. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork. James Crawford had come home, and Sarah Whitehorse was about to meet the man who would decide her fate. Rosa left Sarah in the small room, closing the door behind her. Through the walls, Sarah could hear boots on the wooden floor. Rosa's voice speaking in rapid Spanish, and then a deeper voice responding. Male, gruff, sounding tired. Sarah stood, smoothing down her dress uselessly. Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them together tightly. Everything she had endured, the council's contempt, the long walk, the uncertainty, had been leading to this moment. The door opened. Rosa gestured for her to come out. "Senor Crawford will see you now." Sarah stepped into the main room. The man standing by the fireplace was not what she had expected. James Crawford was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard physical labor. He was older than Sarah had imagined, perhaps in his early 40s, with sun-weathered skin and lines around his eyes that suggested he spent more time squinting into the sun than sitting comfortably indoors. His hair was dark brown, streaked with grey at the temples, cut short in the military style. He wore dusty work clothes, a plain shirt, canvas pants, leather boots that had seen better days. His hands, resting on the fireplace mantel, were scarred and calloused, but it was his eyes that caught Sarah's attention. They were sharp, intelligent, and calculating, the eyes of a man who missed nothing and trusted little. He was studying her with the same careful assessment she imagined he used when evaluating livestock or land deals. The silence stretched out. Sarah forced herself to stand straight, to meet his gaze without flinching, though every instinct told her to lower her eyes in deference. Finally, Crawford spoke. "Sarah Whitehorse." His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. "Not hostile, but not warm either. You walked here from the settlement." "Yes, sir. 15 miles in one day, yes, sir." He moved away from the fireplace, circling her slowly. Sarah held herself still, letting him look. She knew what he saw. A poor Apache girl in a threadbare dress with nothing to recommend her. No beauty, no dowry, no connections. Just determination and pride that probably looked like foolishness to a man like him. "Rosa," Crawford said, without taking his eyes off Sarah, "would you bring coffee, please? And stay. I want you here for this conversation." Rosa nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Crawford gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit." Sarah sat, perching on the edge of the cushioned chair, as if it might swallow her whole. Crawford took the chair opposite, leaning back with the ease of a man in his own domain. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "Do you know why I asked your tribal council for a bride?" Sarah hesitated, then decided honesty was her only real weapon here. "No, sir. And I don't believe anyone in the settlement knows either. There has been much speculation. A ghost of something, amusement maybe, crossed Crawford's face. "I imagine there has been. The truth is practical, not romantic. I'm 43 years old. I've built this ranch from nothing over 20 years. I have no heir, no family. If I die tomorrow, everything I've built goes to distant cousins back east who've never worked a day in their lives and wouldn't know a cow from a mule." He paused as Rosa returned with a tray bearing a coffee pot and cups. She poured for all three of them, then settled into a chair nearby, her sharp eyes watching the exchange. Crawford continued, "I need a wife. I need sons to inherit this land. But here's the problem. White women from town come with expectations I can't meet. They want social calls and tea parties and trips to Denver. They want me to become something I'm not, refined, civilized, tamed." He said the last word with clear disdain. "I'm a rancher. I work with my hands. I sleep 4 hours a night during calving season. I don't dance or play piano or care about what the ladies' auxiliary thinks of my table manners." Sarah listened, trying to understand where this was leading. "So I thought about Apache women," Crawford said bluntly. "Hard workers, practical, know how to survive in harsh conditions, understand what it means to build something from nothing. No illusions about romance or fairy tales. Just honest partnership and mutual benefit." He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "I sent my request to the tribal council 3 weeks ago. I told them I wanted a woman willing to marry according to white law, learn English if she didn't already speak it, and work alongside me to build this ranch bigger and stronger. I offered a substantial bride price to be paid to her family, and I promised she would be treated with respect and given a position of authority in this household." Sarah's mind raced. This was a business arrangement. He was being completely transparent about it. No pretense of affection, no false promises, just cold, clear reality. "I expected them to send their finest," Crawford continued, his voice taking on an edge. "Someone valued, someone accomplished, someone whose family would benefit from the bride price and the alliance." He leaned forward slightly. "Instead, they sent you, a girl with no family to speak of, no dowry, nothing to gain them. So my question is, why you, Sarah Whitehorse?" This was the moment. Sarah could lie, could pretend the council had chosen her for good reasons. But Crawford was clearly intelligent, and lies would only insult them both. "They sent me as a test," Sarah said quietly, "to see if you were sincere, to see what you would do when presented with someone unworthy." Crawford's jaw tightened, and Sarah saw a flash of anger in his eyes, but not directed at her. "They sent you expecting me to reject you?" "Yes, sir. And then, having understood your true standards, they would send someone they actually value, using you as nothing more than a scout to test the terrain." Crawford's voice was cold now. "Did they tell you this?" "Not in so many words." "But I understood." Rosa made a small sound of disgust. Crawford set his coffee cup down with a sharp click against the saucer. "And you came anyway," he said, "knowing you were being used, knowing you were expected to fail. You walked 15 miles to meet a stranger who would probably send you back in humiliation." Sarah lifted her chin. "I had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. At least this way, I got to decide my own fate instead of having it decided for me." For a long moment, Crawford stared at her. Then unexpectedly he laughed, a short, sharp bark of genuine amusement. "You've got backbone, I'll give you that." He stood and walked to the window, looking out over his land as the last light faded from the sky. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to offer you a choice, Sarah Whitehorse, and you're going to have time to think about it before you answer." He turned back to face her. "Option 1. I can send you back to your settlement tomorrow with a message for your council that they insulted me deeply, and I will no longer consider any alliance with them. You go home, and things return to how they were." Sarah's heart sank, but she kept her face neutral. "Option 2, Crawford continued. "You stay here. Not as my wife, not yet, but as an employee of this ranch. I'll pay you wages, same as I pay any of my workers. You'll learn how this operation runs. You'll work hard, probably harder than you've ever worked. Rosa will teach you English reading and writing, and how to manage a household of this size. I'll teach you about ranching, about business, about the law, and at the end of 6 months, we'll both decide if this arrangement could become permanent." Sarah stared at him, barely able to process what she was hearing. "If after 6 months you want to leave, you'll have earned enough money to go anywhere you want, back to your people, to another town, wherever. You'll have skills and education. You'll have choices." Crawford's voice softened slightly. "And if after 6 months we both agree this could work, then we'll marry legally, and you'll become a full partner in this ranch. Not just a wife, a partner. With legal rights to property, inheritance, everything." He crossed his arms. "But I need you to understand something. This won't be easy. My ranch hands are going to have opinions about an Apache woman working here. The townspeople are going to gossip. Some of my business associates won't like it. And the work itself is brutal. Early mornings, late nights, physical labor, difficult decisions. I'm not offering you a comfortable life. I'm offering you a chance to build something real." Sarah's mind spun. 6 months. A real choice, wages, education, everything the council had never offered her, everything she'd never dreamed of having. "I don't need an answer tonight," Crawford said. "Sleep on it. Rosa will prepare a room for you. In the morning, you can tell me what you've decided." Rosa stood nodding approvingly. "Come, child. I will show you where you'll sleep." Sarah rose on shaking legs. "Mr. Crawford, James," he interrupted. "If you're going to work for me, call me James." "James," Sarah corrected, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "Thank you for the choice. No one has ever given me that before." Something shifted in Crawford's expression, respect perhaps, or recognition. "Everyone deserves choices, Sarah. The question is what you do with them when you get them." As Rosa led her down a hallway to a small but clean bedroom, Sarah's mind whirled with possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. Her job, wages, education, respect, partnership. The council had sent her here to fail, to be rejected, to learn her place. Instead, James Crawford had offered her a future. Sarah lay awake in the small bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she'd ever slept on, a real mattress with clean sheets and a thick quilt. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the black sky, the same stars that had watched over her grandmother's shelter. But everything else was different. She replayed Crawford's offer in her mind, examining it from every angle, searching for the trap she was certain must be hidden somewhere in his words. Men didn't simply offer women, especially Apache women, equal partnership and respect. There had to be a catch, but what if there wasn't? What if James Crawford meant exactly what he said? Sarah thought about returning to the settlement, about the look on Thomas Blackfeather's face when she walked back through alone and rejected, the satisfaction in his eyes, the council's vindication that she had been exactly as worthless as they'd believed, her grandmother trying to comfort her while they both pretended things hadn't gotten worse. Then she thought about staying, about learning to read and write in English, about earning her own wages, about having legal rights to property, about building something instead of merely surviving. The choice, when she really examined it, wasn't difficult at all. When dawn broke, Sarah rose and washed her face in the basin Rosa had left in her room. She braided her hair carefully, adding her grandmother's clasp. Then she walked out to the main room, where she could already hear voices and smell coffee brewing. James Crawford sat at a large wooden table, papers spread before him, a cup of coffee steaming at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. "I'll stay," Sarah said before she could lose her nerve. "I accept your offer." Crawford studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Good, sit down. We have a lot to discuss before the day starts. Over breakfast, eggs, bacon, biscuits with butter, more food than Sarah typically ate in 2 days." Crawford laid out his expectations with the same blunt honesty he'd shown the night before. "You'll start in the kitchen with Rosa. She'll teach you how this household runs, how to manage supplies, how to cook for 20 ranch hands during peak season. That's not women's work or beneath you, that's essential business operations. A ranch this size needs organized meal planning or everything falls apart." Sarah nodded, eating slowly, savoring each bite. "After 2 weeks, you'll start working with the horses. My foreman Dutch Miller will teach you. You'll learn to ride properly, to care for the animals, to recognize illness and injury. Horses are money on a ranch. You need to understand their value. You'll spend time with the account books. I'll show you how we track expenses, profits, losses, how we plan for lean seasons and maximize good ones. Knowledge is power, Sarah. The more you understand about how this operation works, the more valuable you become, to me, to yourself, to any future you choose." He took a sip of coffee. "Rosa will also teach you reading and writing. Every evening, 2 hours of lessons. No exceptions, no matter how tired you are. I can already read a little," Sarah offered quietly. "The mission school taught me some when I was young, before my mother died." Crawford's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's more than I expected. Good. That'll speed things up." He pulled out a sheet of paper and a pencil. "Write your name for me." Sarah took the pencil, her hand trembling slightly, and carefully wrote, "Sarah Whitehorse." The letters were uneven, childlike, but legible. "Not bad," Crawford said. "You've got the foundation. Rosa will build on it." He set the paper aside. "Now wages. I'll pay you $30 a month, same as a starting ranch hand. Room and board included. Money goes into a bank account in town under your name only. At the end of 6 months, if you choose to leave, you'll have $180 and the skills to use it wisely. $30 a month." Sarah tried to wrap her mind around that amount. She'd never had more than a few coins at once in her entire life. "There are rules," Crawford continued. "You work hard, you show up on time, you treat everyone on this ranch with respect regardless of their position or heritage. You'll have 1 day off a week, Sundays. You can do whatever you want with that time. Go to town, rest, visit your settlement if you choose. But Monday morning you're back at work. The ranch hands are going to test you," he warned. "Some because you're Apache, some because you're a woman, some just because that's what men do to newcomers. You handle it with dignity and competence. Prove yourself through work, not words. I'll back you up if anyone crosses a serious line, but you need to fight your own battles when possible." Sarah absorbed all of this, her mind racing to keep up. This was real. This was happening. "Questions?" Crawford asked. "Why are you doing this?" The words escaped before Sarah could stop them. "You could have just sent me away. Why give me this opportunity?" Crawford leaned back in his chair, considering. 3 years ago I had a ranch hand named Samuel. Black man, former slave, hardest worker I've ever seen. Most of the other hands gave him hell at first. But Samuel kept his head down, did his job better than anyone else, and eventually earned their respect. When he left to start his own small ranch, he told me something I've never forgotten. Crawford's eyes grew distant. He said that most people spend their whole lives trying to prove they deserve basic human dignity. But the lucky ones, the ones who succeed, they find someone willing to give them a chance before the proof exists. Someone willing to bet on potential instead of demanding credentials. He refocused on Sarah. Your tribal council looked at you and saw nothing. I'd look at you and see someone who walked 15 miles knowing she'd probably fail, but came anyway. That tells me more about your character than any recommendation ever could. Before Sarah could respond, the front door burst open and a wiry man in his 60s strode in, his weathered face creased with worry. "Boss, we got problems with the fence line on the North 40. Looks like someone's been cutting wire and we lost about—" He stopped abruptly, noticing Sarah. "Dutch, this is Sarah Whitehorse," Crawford said calmly. "She'll be working for the ranch. Sarah, this is Dutch Miller, my foreman. Best horseman in the territory, and the man who keeps this place running when I can't." Dutch's eyes went from Sarah to Crawford and back again, questions clearly racing through his mind. But whatever he saw in Crawford's expression made him swallow those questions. He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am? Sir?" Sarah replied. "We'll discuss the fence after breakfast," Crawford told him. "Have the hands ready to ride at 7. Dutch nodded and left, but Sarah saw him glance back at her before the door closed. "And so it begins," Rosa said dryly from the kitchen doorway. "By noon, every person in a 20-mile radius will know there's an Apache girl at the Crawford Ranch." "Let them talk," Crawford said, standing. "Talk is cheap. Results are what matter." He looked at Sarah. "Report to Rosa in the kitchen. Your education starts now." The first week was the hardest of Sarah's life. Rosa worked with her from before dawn until after dark, teaching her everything about managing a large household. How to cook for crowds efficiently, how to preserve food for winter, how to manage inventory, so nothing was wasted, but everyone stayed fed. How to delegate tasks to the younger women who came in from nearby farms to help with laundry and cleaning. Rosa was a demanding teacher, correcting Sarah sharply when she made mistakes, but also showing genuine approval when Sarah got things right. "You learn fast," she admitted, after Sarah successfully prepared breakfast for 18 ranch hands on her 4th morning. "Faster than the last 3 girls Crawford tried to train." "There were others?" Sarah asked, surprised. Rosa snorted. "White girls from town who thought being a rancher's wife meant wearing pretty dresses and giving orders. They lasted a week, maybe 2, before running home crying about the work being too hard." She gave Sarah an appraising look. "You're different. You understand that anything worth having requires sacrifice. In the evenings, after the dinner dishes were cleaned and put away, Rosa sat with Sarah at the kitchen table and taught her to read and write properly. Sarah's childhood lessons came back slowly, and she attacked the work with fierce determination. Within 3 weeks, she could read simple sentences and write short notes without help. "You have a hungry mind," Rosa observed one evening. "That's good. A hungry mind can take you anywhere." The ranch hands were a different challenge. Most ignored Sarah completely, which was better than hostility. A few made crude jokes just loud enough for her to overhear, comments about Crawford's squaw or wondering what services she provided besides cooking. Sarah gritted her teeth and focused on her work, remembering Crawford's advice about proving herself through competence. One hand, a surly man named Pike, seemed determined to make her life difficult. He complained constantly about the food, made messes deliberately, and found ways to brush against her inappropriately when passing in the kitchen, On her 10th day, Pike grabbed her arm as she carried a heavy pot of stew. Maybe if you spent less time pretending to be civilized and more time learning your place, the food wouldn't taste like— "Remove your hand," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Or what?" Pike sneered. "You'll run crying to Crawford. Everyone knows why he really keeps you around." The pot of stew Sarah was carrying upended directly onto Pike's lap. The hot liquid soaked through his pants and he yelped, jumping back and cursing. "Oh, I'm so clumsy," Sarah said, her voice perfectly innocent. "How careless of me. I do hope that it doesn't burn too badly." Several ranch hands who had witnessed the exchange tried unsuccessfully to hide their laughter. Dutch Miller, who had just entered for dinner, assessed the situation immediately. "Pike, go change and cool off," he ordered. Literally. "Then come see me. We need to discuss appropriate behavior on this ranch." Pike shot Sarah a venomous look, but left without another word. Dutch approached Sarah, who was already cleaning up the spilled stew. "That was a $30 pot of food," he said mildly. "I'll pay for it from my wages," Sarah replied, not looking up. "No, you won't. Pike will." Dutch's voice was firm. Crawford was clear. Everyone gets treated with respect here. Pike forgot that. He won't forget again. That night, as Sarah fell into bed exhausted, she realized something important. She was still standing, still working. I'm still learning. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she was earning something she'd never had before. Respect. 3 weeks into her employment, Crawford informed Sarah it was time to learn the horses. She reported to the stables at dawn, where Dutch Miller waited with 2 saddled mounts. "Ever been on a horse?" Dutch asked without preamble, a few times. "Short rides?" "Nothing serious," Dutch grunted. "Well, you're about to get serious real quick. This here's Maple." He gestured to a sorrel mare with gentle eyes. "She's patient with beginners. Won't throw you unless you do something real stupid. Over the next 2 hours, Dutch taught Sarah the basics of proper riding, how to sit, how to hold the reins, how to communicate with the animal through subtle shifts of weight and pressure. He was gruff but thorough, correcting her posture repeatedly until she got it right. "Ranching means spending half your life on horseback," he explained as they walked the horses around the corral. "You can't manage land you can't reach, and you can't reach most of this ranch on foot. So if you're serious about learning this business, you better get comfortable up there." By the end of the first week of riding lessons, Sarah's legs and back ached constantly. But she was staying on the horse, controlling her direction, even managing a trot without bouncing around like a loose sack of grain. "You're not terrible," Dutch admitted one morning, which Sarah had learned was high praise coming from him. "Tomorrow, we ride out to check the south pasture. Real work, not just practice. The ride to the south pasture took 2 hours. Dutch maintained a steady pace, pointing out landmarks and explaining the ranch's geography as they traveled. Sarah saw the true scope of Crawford's land for the first time, thousands of acres stretching to the horizon, divided into carefully managed sections with natural water sources and grazing rotation. "Crawford's smart about the land," Dutch said as they stopped to water the horses at a creek. "Lots of ranchers just pack as many cattle as possible onto every acre and wonder why the grass dies and the animals get sick. Crawford actually thinks ahead, rotates grazing, maintains the water sources, plans for drought years. That's why this ranch survives when others fail." "How long have you worked for him?" Sarah asked. 17 years. Signed on when he was just getting started. Barely had 200 head of cattle and a dream bigger than Texas. Dutch gazed across the land with evident pride. "Watched him build all this from nothing. Never seen a man work harder or smarter. Why did he never marry before?" The question had been nagging at Sarah since her arrival. Dutch was quiet for a long moment. "There was a woman once, Mary Elizabeth Garrett, banker's daughter from Denver. Crawford met her at a cattlemen's association meeting about 8 years back. She was educated, beautiful, everything you'd expect a successful rancher's wife to be." He pulled out tobacco and began rolling a cigarette. "Crawford courted her proper, traveled to Denver every month, sent letters, the whole romantic bit. She seemed interested. Her daddy certainly was interested in Crawford's money. They got engaged. Sarah waited as Dutch lit his cigarette and took a long drag. Mary Elizabeth came out here to see the ranch before the wedding. Spent 3 days. By the 3rd day she was in tears, begging her daddy to take her home. Dutch shook his head. Turned out she'd pictured something completely different. Thought Crawford owned a fancy house in town with servants and society parties. When she saw the reality, the isolation, the hard work, the rough living, she couldn't handle it. Called off the engagement before the week was out. That must have hurt him, Sarah said quietly. Changed him, more like. Made him realize he couldn't pretend to be something he wasn't just to get a wife. Better to be alone than to be with someone who resented his whole way of life. Dutch gave her a sideways glance. That's why he asked for an Apache bride. Figured someone from your people would understand hard work and wouldn't expect him to become a city gentleman. They remounted and continued riding. As they crested a hill, Sarah saw something that made her pull Maple to a stop. In the distance, a group of about 30 Apache people moved across Crawford's land, families with children, elders, several horses loaded with possessions. Travelers heading north, Dutch explained. Crawford lets your people cross his land freely, as long as they don't harm the cattle. Most ranchers would shoot on sight, but Crawford figures the land was yours before it was his. Least he can do is let folks pass through in peace. Something tightened in Sarah's chest. This small gesture of respect, allowing her people safe passage, spoke volumes about Crawford's character that his words never had. When they returned to the ranch that evening, Sarah was exhausted but exhilarated. She'd spent the day doing real ranch work, checking fence lines, counting cattle in the south pasture, identifying a sick calf that needed medical attention. Dutch had treated her as a working partner, not a charity case or a curiosity. Crawford was waiting on the porch when they rode up. How'd she do? Stayed on the horse, didn't complain. Spotted that sick calf before I did, Dutch reported. She'll do, Crawford nodded, satisfied. Sarah, clean up and meet me in my office. It's time you learn the business side of ranching. An hour later, Sarah sat across from Crawford at his large desk, ledger books spread between them. The office was lined with shelves holding books on animal husbandry, land management, legal codes, and business practices. A map of the ranch covered one entire wall, marked with notes in Crawford's angular handwriting. A ranch is a business, Crawford began, opening one of the ledgers. And like any business, it survives or fails based on managing resources intelligently. These books tell the story of every decision I make. He walked her through the entries: expenses for feed, veterinary care, equipment repairs, wages for the hands, income from cattle sales, horse breeding, occasional land leases, calculations showing profit margins, seasonal variations, long-term investments. See this? He pointed to a column of numbers. Last winter was harsh. Lost 43 head of cattle to the cold and lack of feed. That's roughly $1,800 in losses. But look here, he flipped to another page. The previous summer, I invested in additional hay storage and winter feed supply. Cost me $900. That investment meant we only lost 43 head instead of possibly losing 200. Sarah leaned closer, fascinated despite the complexity of the numbers. So you spend money to save money later? Exactly. That's the difference between a good rancher and a failed one, thinking beyond next week to next year, next decade. Crawford pulled out another book. This is my planning ledger. Every major decision I make gets written here first. I calculate the cost, the potential return, the risks. Then I decide if it's worth doing. He showed her entries for everything from building new corrals to hiring additional hands for spring roundup. Each entry included detailed reasoning, cost projections, and expected outcomes. Why are you showing me all this? Sarah asked. This seems like secret information. Things you wouldn't share with an employee. Crawford closed the ledger and looked at her directly. Because in 3.5 months, if we both agree to make this partnership permanent, you'll need to understand every aspect of this operation. A wife who doesn't understand the business can't help run it. She becomes a liability instead of an asset. And if I leave after 6 months, Then you'll leave knowing how to evaluate any business opportunity that comes your way. You'll understand contracts, negotiations, financial planning. That knowledge is yours to keep regardless of what you decide. They worked until late into the evening. Crawford was a patient teacher, explaining concepts Sarah didn't understand, making her work through calculations herself rather than simply giving her answers. By the time Rosa called them for supper, Sarah's head spun with new information, but she'd successfully calculated the profit margin on last season's cattle sale without help. "You have an aptitude for this," Crawford observed as they walked to the dining room. "Most people's eyes glaze over when I start talking numbers. You lean in closer. It's like solving a puzzle," Sarah said. "Everything connects to everything else. If you understand the connections, you can predict outcomes." Crawford smiled, a real smile rare on his usually serious face. "That's exactly right. You've got the mind for this, Sarah. If you keep learning at this pace, you'll understand this ranch better than most ranchers understand their own operations." At dinner, Rosa watched them with knowing eyes as Crawford and Sarah continued discussing herd management strategies. The older woman said nothing, but Sarah caught the small, satisfied smile that crossed her face. That night, lying in bed, Sarah realized something had shifted. She was no longer simply surviving at the Crawford ranch. She was learning, growing, becoming something she'd never imagined possible. The scared girl who'd walked 15 miles expecting rejection felt like a distant memory, but she also realized something else. The 6-month deadline that had seemed so far away was now less than 3 months distant. Eventually, she would have to make a real decision, stay and become Crawford's partner in this enterprise, or take her earnings and education and build a different life elsewhere. For the first time, Sarah wasn't certain which choice she would make, and that uncertainty both thrilled and terrified her. Outside her window, a coyote howled in the distance, its lonely call echoing across the vast ranch lands. Sarah listened until the sound faded into silence, then finally drifted into sleep, dreaming of numbers and horizons and futures she was only beginning to imagine. 2 months into her employment, Crawford announced they would be riding into town together. "Time you opened that bank account I mentioned," he said over breakfast. "And I need to meet with my lawyer about some contracts. You'll come with me to learn how these meetings work." Sarah's stomach knotted. She'd been dreading this moment, facing the townspeople, seeing their reactions to an Apache woman riding alongside James Crawford. The ranch had become a safe bubble, but the outside world was different. "Wear your Sunday dress," Rosa instructed, having anticipated this day. She'd been working with Sarah on a new dress for weeks, teaching her proper stitching techniques. It wasn't fancy by white standards, but it was clean, well-made and modest, a simple blue cotton dress with a white collar. The ride into Silver Creek took 90 minutes. Crawford maintained a comfortable pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining property boundaries they passed. He seemed completely at ease, but Sarah noticed him watching her, gauging her nervousness. "The first time is always the hardest," he said as the town came into view. "After today, it gets easier." Silver Creek was larger than Sarah expected. A proper town with 2 main streets, numerous shops, a church, a school, and several saloons. People moved along the wooden sidewalks, going about their business. As Crawford and Sarah rode down Main Street, conversation stopped. Heads turned. Women whispered behind their hands. Men stared openly. Crawford kept riding as if he noticed nothing unusual, tipping his hat politely to people he knew. Sarah kept her spine straight and her eyes forward, refusing to show how much the scrutiny unnerved her. They stopped first at the bank, a solid brick building on the corner of Main and First. Inside, the teller, a thin man with spectacles and a nervous disposition, nearly dropped his pen when he saw Sarah. "Mr. Crawford," he stammered. "How can I help you today?" "Need to open an account for Miss Whitehorse here," Crawford said matter-of-factly. "She's employed at my ranch." "Standard savings account, her name only." The teller's eyes darted between Crawford and Sarah. I'm not sure if... Is there a law preventing Apache citizens from opening bank accounts, Henry?" Crawford's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "No, sir, but then I suggest you prepare the paperwork. Miss Whitehorse has wages to deposit." 10 minutes later, Sarah had her first bank account with $60 deposited, 2 months of wages. The teller handled everything with barely concealed discomfort, but he handled it. When they left, Sarah clutched the small bank book like it was made of gold. Her name, written in official ink on official paper, with a number beside it representing money that was entirely hers. "How does it feel?" Crawford asked as they walked to the lawyer's office. "Strange, powerful, frightening." Sarah looked down at the bank book. "Like I'm someone different than I was yesterday." "You are different. You've got capital now. That changes how the world sees you, whether they want to admit it or not." The lawyer's office was above the general store, accessed by an outside staircase. Crawford knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. The office was cluttered with papers, books, and file boxes. Behind a massive desk sat a portly man in his 50s with wild grey hair and shrewd blue eyes. "Crawford." The lawyer stood, grinning widely. "About time you showed up. These contracts won't review themselves." His eyes landed on Sarah. "And who's this?" "Samuel, meet Sarah Whitehorse. She's learning the business side of ranching." "Sarah, this is Samuel Brennan, the only honest lawyer in 3 counties. Only honest lawyer anywhere," Brennan corrected, shaking Sarah's hand with genuine warmth that surprised her. "Apache?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "Good people. Had an Apache tracker save my life once during my cavalry days." He gestured to chairs. Sit. Let's talk about these supply contracts you're negotiating." For the next hour, Sarah watched Crawford and Brennan discuss complex legal language, negotiate terms, and debate clause interpretations. Brennan explained each section to Sarah when Crawford asked him to, treating her like a legitimate student rather than an oddity. "See this clause here?" Brennan pointed to a paragraph in the contract. "This is where they try to trick you. Says payment is due upon satisfaction of delivery, but who determines satisfaction? If it's them, they can refuse payment for any reason and claim they're unsatisfied. Always specify objective standards. Delivery of 50 head of cattle, branded and healthy, as certified by neutral veterinarian. No wiggle room." Sarah leaned forward, absorbing every word. This was a different kind of power. The power of words, of understanding how agreements could be twisted or protected. "You're a natural at this," Brennan observed, watching her follow the conversation. "Crawford, you training her to take over when you retire?" "Something like that," Crawford said neutrally. After the lawyer's office, Crawford took Sarah to the general store. The proprietor, a heavy-set woman named Mrs. Dalton, served them with tight-lipped disapproval, but served them nonetheless. Crawford ordered supplies for the ranch, then turned to Sarah. "Pick out fabric for 2 new dresses. And get yourself proper riding boots. Those moccasins won't hold up through winter. I can't afford. Consider it a work expense. You need appropriate clothing for the work you're doing. Choose." Mrs. Dalton's face was a mask of disdain as she measured fabric and wrapped Sarah's selections. When a well-dressed woman entered the store and saw Sarah, she gasped audibly and rushed back out. "That was Margaret Henderson," Crawford said mildly as they left with their packages. "Her husband owns the feed supply company. She'll have told everyone in town about this within the hour. Does it bother you?" Sarah asked. "What they think?" Crawford secured the packages to his saddle. "I stopped caring what most people think about 20 years ago. The ones whose opinions matter, like Samuel Brennan, judge people by character and competence. The ones whose opinions don't matter will talk regardless of what I do." He swung into his saddle. "One more stop before we head back." He led her to a small office with a sign reading, "Dr. Robert Chen, Physician." Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face. "Standard practice," Crawford explained. "All my employees get a medical check once a year. Make sure they're healthy, catch any problems early. You're overdue." Dr. Chen was a Chinese man in his 40s, with gentle hands and a quiet manner. He examined Sarah thoroughly, asked about her medical history, and pronounced her healthy but underweight. "She needs to gain at least 10 pounds. he told Crawford. "She's been undernourished for years. It'll take time for her body to recover. Rosa's already working on that," Crawford assured him. "The woman's convinced good food can cure anything." As they rode back to the ranch, the sun lowering toward the horizon, Sarah processed everything that had happened. A bank account, legal education, new clothes purchased without shame or charity, a doctor's visit treating her health as something that mattered. "Why did you really bring me today?" Sarah asked suddenly. "You could have opened that bank account without me. Could have met with your lawyer alone." Crawford glanced at her. "Because you needed to see that you can exist in that world. That you can walk into a bank, into a lawyer's office, into any establishment, and claim your right to be there. The more you do it, the more natural it becomes." He paused. "And because I wanted them to see you with me, to understand that you're not some curiosity or temporary amusement. You're a person I do business with, someone I respect." That message needed delivering. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Crawford spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "In 3 weeks there's a Cattlemen's Association meeting in Silver Creek. Big gathering, ranchers from all over the territory. Normally I go alone, but this time I want you to come with me." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Why?" "Because these meetings are where the real business happens. Deals get made, information gets shared, alliances form. If you're going to be my partner," he caught himself. "If you decide to be my partner, you need to understand that world. And those ranchers need to understand that you're not someone they can ignore or dismiss. They'll be hostile," Sarah said quietly. "Some will. Others will be curious. A few might even be respectful." Crawford looked at her directly. "But you've handled everything else I've thrown at you. You can handle this too." As the ranch came into view, Sarah felt the weight of another test settling on her shoulders. The town had been challenging enough. A room full of wealthy, powerful ranchers would be something else entirely. But she'd walked 15 miles expecting rejection and found opportunity instead. She'd faced hostile ranch hands and earned their grudging respect. She'd learned to ride, to read complex contracts, to calculate profit margins. She could face a room full of ranchers. "I'll go," Sarah said firmly. Crawford smiled. "I knew you would." That evening, Rosa found Sarah in her room, staring at the fabric and boots from town. "You did well today," the older woman said. "I heard about it from Pablo, who heard it from his cousin, who works at the stable. The whole town is talking about the Apache girl who thinks she belongs in their world. About the Apache girl who walked into their world and didn't flinch." Rosa sat on the edge of the bed. "You're changing things, Sarah. Maybe not quickly, maybe not easily, but you're changing what people believe is possible. That matters." After Rosa left, Sarah opened her bank book again, reading her name on the page. Sarah Whitehorse. 2 months ago, that name had meant nothing. The poorest girl from an Apache settlement, worth so little her own people had sent her as a test subject. Now it meant something. It was the name on a bank account, the name of someone learning to ride and read legal contracts, the name of someone James Crawford respected enough to bring into town to teach, to trust. But in 10 weeks, the 6 months would be up, and Sarah would have to decide if she wanted to trade that name for another one. Crawford. The 3 weeks before the Cattlemen's Association meeting passed in a blur of preparation. Crawford drilled Sarah on ranch statistics. How many head of cattle they ran, average weight at market, breeding success rates, winter survival percentages. He taught her the names and reputations of the major ranchers who would attend. Richard Thornton owns the Diamond T, the biggest spread north of here. He's old money, third-generation rancher, thinks everyone else is beneath him, Crawford explained one evening over the ledger books. "Don't let him intimidate you. His operation is twice the size of mine, but half as profitable because he refuses to adapt to new methods." "What about women at these meetings?" Sarah asked. "A few ranchers bring their wives, but the women usually gather separately for tea and gossip while the men talk business." Crawford looked up from the papers. "You won't be doing that. You'll be with me in the main meeting. People won't like it, but they'll have to accept it." The night before the meeting, Sarah barely slept. She wore her new blue dress, the one Rosa had helped her make, with the good leather boots Crawford had purchased. Rosa braided her hair in an intricate pattern and added her grandmother's beaded clasp. "You look like someone important," Rosa said, stepping back to admire her work. "Because you are someone important. Don't forget that. The meeting was held at the Silver Creek Hotel, the largest building in town. When Crawford and Sarah entered the lobby, the buzz of conversation died like someone had blown out a candle. Every head turned, every eye fixed on Sarah. Crawford kept walking, nodding to acquaintances, guiding Sarah toward the main meeting room with a hand lightly on her elbow. The gesture was both protective and proprietary, a clear signal that she was with him and under his protection. "Crawford!" A booming voice cut through the tension. A massive man with a grey beard and a stomach that tested the buttons of his vest strode toward them. "I heard you might bring a guest, but didn't believe it until now." "Daniel," Crawford shook the man's hand. "Sarah Whitehorse, this is Daniel Garrett. Runs the Bar G west of here. I have known him for 15 years, and he hasn't gotten any prettier." Garrett laughed, the sound genuine and warm. His eyes assessed Sarah with frank curiosity, but no malice. "Apache?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said clearly. "Well, I'll be damned." Crawford always did have a talent for surprising people. He lowered his voice. "Fair warning, Thornton's already making noise about this. Man's got opinions about everything and the social grace of a wounded bear. When has Thornton not made noise?" Crawford replied, "Come on, Sarah. Let's get seats before the good ones are taken." The meeting room was set up with rows of chairs facing a raised platform. Perhaps 40 men filled the space, ranging from young ranch owners to grizzled veterans of the cattle business. As Crawford and Sarah found seats in the third row, Sarah felt the weight of dozens of stares. A tall man with silver hair and a perfectly tailored suit approached. Everything about him screamed wealth and authority, from his polished boots to the gold watch chain across his vest. "Crawford," the man's voice was cold. "I see you've brought entertainment." Crawford stood slowly, his movement deliberate. "Richard Thornton meets Sarah Whitehorse, my associate. She's here to learn the cattle business." "Associate?" Thornton's lip curled. "Is that what we're calling it now? Really, Crawford, I expected better taste from you. If you wanted companionship, there are establishments for that. You don't bring it to a professional gathering." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Several nearby ranchers shifted uncomfortably. Sarah felt heat rise in her face, but before she could respond, Crawford stepped closer to Thornton. "Choose your next words very carefully." "Richard," Crawford's voice was quiet but carried an edge, like a blade. "Because if you insult Miss Whitehorse again, you and I are going to have a serious problem." Thornton's eyes widened slightly. He'd clearly expected Crawford to laugh it off, to accept the insult as proper social boundary enforcement. "You're defending an Indian girl's honor? Have you lost your mind?" "I'm defending my associate's honor, same as I'd defend any professional colleague." Crawford's stance didn't change, but somehow he seemed larger, more dangerous. "Sarah is learning ranch management from the ground up. She understands more about profitable operations than half the men in this room, including you. So you can apologize and move along, or we can step outside and settle this another way." The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see how this confrontation would resolve. Thornton glanced around, calculating. Whatever he saw in Crawford's eyes, or in the faces of the other ranchers, made him reconsider. "No offense intended," he said stiffly, though his tone suggested otherwise. He turned and walked away. Crawford remained standing until Thornton had moved to the far side of the room, then sat back down beside Sarah. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Sarah's hands were shaking, but she nodded. "Thank you. Nothing to thank me for. Just stating facts." Crawford glanced at her. "But that's how it's going to be. People are going to test you, insult you, try to make you quit. You need to decide if you're strong enough to face that." Before Sarah could answer, Daniel Garrett called the meeting to order. For the next 2 hours, ranchers discussed market conditions, shared information about cattle prices in different cities, debated the quality of various railroad shipping routes, and argued about water rights disputes. Crawford participated actively, offering insights drawn from his careful record-keeping. Several times he referenced data that Sarah had helped him compile, and each time he did, he gestured to her acknowledgement, making it clear she'd contributed to his analysis. About halfway through the meeting, the discussion turned to winter feed preparation. A rancher named William Foster complained about the cost of hay storage. "Too expensive," Foster grumbled. "Lost money on it last year. Not worth the investment. Depends on how you calculate the return," Crawford said. "Sarah, what were our losses last winter versus the previous winter?" Sarah's heart jumped. Everyone was looking at her now. She took a breath and stood, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Last winter, with the additional feed storage Mr. Crawford invested in, we lost 43 head of cattle. The winter before, with inadequate storage, we lost 118 head. She met Foster's eyes directly. "That's roughly $3,000 in saved livestock. The storage facility cost $900 to build. Return on investment of over 300% in the first year alone." Silence. Then Garrett started clapping slowly. "Well, I'll be damned. The girl knows her numbers. Better than most of us," another rancher admitted. "Foster, sounds like you need to hire an Apache accountant." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Not cruel laughter, but genuine amusement. Foster himself cracked a reluctant smile. "Might be right about that." Crawford caught Sarah's eye and nodded slightly. She sat back down, her heart still racing, but something had shifted. She wasn't just Crawford's curiosity anymore. She demonstrated competence, and in a room full of businessmen, competence mattered more than prejudice. After the meeting, several ranchers approached Crawford to talk. Most nodded politely to Sarah. A few actually included her in the conversation, asking her opinion on feed costs or winter preparation strategies. Garrett pulled Crawford aside while Sarah was discussing breeding records with a younger rancher. "That girl's sharp," Garrett said, his voice carrying to where Sarah stood. "You planning on marrying her or just torturing yourself?" Crawford's answer was too quiet for Sarah to hear, but Garrett laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, whatever you decide, don't wait too long. Someone that smart won't stay available forever." On the ride back to the ranch, darkness settled around them like a blanket. Crawford was quiet, lost in thought. "That went better than I expected," Sarah finally said. "You exceeded expectations." "There's a difference." Crawford adjusted his reins. "You stood up in front of 40 hardened ranchers and delivered financial analysis without flinching. Most men twice your age would have been terrified. I was terrified." "I know, but you did it anyway." "That's courage." He was quiet for a moment. "Thornton will spread stories. About you, about me, about what he thinks is happening at my ranch. It might get ugly. Will it hurt your business?" "Thornton's been trying to hurt my business for years. He can't stand that a former cavalry scout with no family money built a more successful operation than his inherited empire." Crawford shrugged. "Let him talk. Results speak louder than gossip." They rode in comfortable silence until the ranch house appeared in the distance. Warm light glowing from the windows, where Rosa had left lamps burning for their return. 8 weeks left," Crawford said suddenly. "Until the 6 months are up." Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd been trying not to think about the approaching deadline. "I know. I want you to start thinking seriously about your decision. What you want, not what you think I want or what makes logical sense. What Sarah Whitehorse actually wants for her life. And if I don't know yet..." Crawford smiled slightly in the darkness. "Then you've got 8 weeks to figure it out. But start thinking, Sarah. Time moves faster than we realize." That night, Sarah lay awake long after she should have been sleeping. She thought about the bank account that now held $90. She thought about the respect in Daniel Garrett's eyes when she delivered those statistics. She thought about Rosa teaching her to cook for 20 people, Dutch teaching her to read a horse's temperament, Crawford teaching her to understand complex business negotiations. She thought about Thornton's contempt and the whispers that would follow her for the rest of her life if she stayed in this world. She thought about returning to the Apache settlement with money and skills, about her grandmother's joy at seeing her again, and she thought about what it might mean to stay here permanently. to become Crawford's partner in marriage as well as business, to take his name and all the complications that came with it. 8 weeks suddenly felt both too long and not nearly long enough to make a decision that would define the rest of her life. 6 weeks before the deadline, Sarah woke to the sound of unfamiliar voices outside. She dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch to find 3 Apache men on horseback talking with Crawford. Her heart seized when she recognized one of them, Running Bear, the council member who had summoned her that first day. Crawford glanced over and gestured for her to join them. "Sarah, you have visitors from your settlement." Running Bear's eyes swept over her, taking in her sturdy boots, her well-made dress, the healthy glow to her skin that came from regular meals and hard work. His expression was unreadable. "Sarah Whitehorse," he said formally, "the council sent us to check on your welfare. It has been nearly 5 months since you left. I'm well, as you can see." Sarah kept her voice neutral, though questions raced through her mind. Why now? What did they really want? The other 2 men, younger warriors Sarah recognized but didn't know well, exchanged glances. One of them, a man named Joseph, spoke up. "We heard stories in town. People say you work here, that Crawford has not married you." "That's correct. I'm employed by Mr. Crawford, learning ranch management." Sarah lifted her chin slightly. "I earn wages, same as any ranch hand." Running Bear's eyes narrowed. "This was not the arrangement." "You were sent to be his bride." "I was sent as a test," Sarah corrected quietly, "to see if Crawford was sincere. He offered me an opportunity to learn instead, and I accepted." "The 6 months aren't finished yet." Crawford had remained silent during this exchange, but now he stepped forward. "I've treated Sarah with complete respect, and according to the terms I outlined when she arrived. She's free to leave any time she chooses. In fact, she's earned enough money to go anywhere she wants." Running Bear looked between them, clearly uncertain how to process this information. It didn't fit any scenario the council had predicted. "The council wishes to know your intentions," Running Bear said to Crawford. "Will you marry her or not?" "That's not your business," Crawford said flatly. "And it's not even my decision alone. When the 6 months are up, Sarah will decide what she wants. Not me, not your council, her." Joseph shifted uncomfortably on his horse. "That is unusual." "So is sending someone as a test expecting them to fail," Crawford replied, his voice hardening. "If your council wants answers, tell them to come ask Sarah themselves when the time is right. Until then, she's under my protection and my employment. Is there anything else?" Running Bear's jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue with Crawford's logic. He looked at Sarah once more. "Your grandmother asks after you?" "She wishes to know you are safe." Sarah's heart clenched. "Tell her I'm well. Tell her I think of her often. And tell her," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "tell her I'm becoming someone she'll be proud of." After the men left, Crawford turned to Sarah. "That rattled you. They came to see if I'd failed yet, if I'd been sent back in shame like they expected." Sarah watched the dust cloud from their horses fade into the distance. "Part of me wants to prove them wrong so badly it hurts. But another part wonders if I'm just being stubborn." "You're allowed to be both." Crawford leaned against the porch railing. "But don't make your decision based on spite or pride. Make it based on what actually serves your future." The visit left Sarah unsettled. That evening, instead of studying ledgers with Crawford, she asked for permission to ride out alone. He hesitated, then nodded. "Take Maple. Stay on ranch property. Be back before dark." Sarah rode to the eastern boundary of Crawford's land, to a high ridge overlooking both the ranch and, in the far distance, the direction of the Apache settlement. She sat there for a long time, watching the sun sink lower, thinking about 2 different futures. If she returned to the settlement with her earnings and skills, what would change? Her grandmother would be proud, certainly, but the council's contempt wouldn't disappear just because she'd survived 6 months working for a white rancher. She'd still be poor Sarah Whitehorse, only now with money that would eventually run out and skills that had limited use in a traditional Apache community. But staying meant tying herself permanently to Crawford's world, facing people like Thornton for the rest of her life, being the subject of gossip and judgment. never fully belonging anywhere. Too white for her people, too Apache for white society, yet staying also meant partnership, growth, building something lasting, having real power and autonomy instead of just surviving on the margins. Sarah was so lost in thought she didn't hear the approaching horse until it was close. She turned, hand instinctively moving to the knife she now carried, then relaxed when she recognized Dutch. "Boss sent me to check on you," Dutch said, riding up beside her. "Said you seemed troubled." "Just thinking." Dutch dismounted and stood at the ridge edge, looking out over the land. "I'm gonna tell you something that ain't my business to tell, but I figure you should know it anyway." Sarah waited. "Crawford's falling for you," Dutch said bluntly. "Probably doesn't realize it himself yet. Man's got the emotional awareness of a fence post. But I've known him for 17 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Sarah's breath caught. "He's never—" "Course he hasn't. Made himself a promise to keep this professional until the 6 months are up. Man's got honor, even when it makes his life harder." Dutch glanced at her. "But you should know what you're walking into. This ain't just a business decision for him anymore, even if he pretends it is." "What about Mary Elizabeth?" Sarah asked quietly. "The woman who left him. That was different. That was him trying to become something he wasn't to please someone else. With you—" Dutch paused, choosing his words. "With you, he's teaching you to understand him as he actually is. No pretense, no hiding the hard parts. If you choose to stay, it'll be with full knowledge of what you're getting into. And if I choose to leave, then he'll be hurt, but he'll respect it. And he'll make sure you have everything you need to succeed wherever you go." Dutch remounted his horse. "But either way, you should make your choice knowing the full truth. Man deserves that much." After Dutch left, Sarah sat for a while longer, processing this new information. Crawford had feelings for her. Not just respect or appreciation for a good employee, but actual feelings. Did she feel the same way? Sarah tested the idea carefully, like probing a sore tooth. When she pictured Crawford, his quiet strength, his unexpected moments of dry humor, the way he explained complex ideas with patience, how he'd stood up to Thornton without hesitation, what did she feel? Safety, respect, partnership, and underneath those practical feelings, something warmer. Something that made her heart beat faster when he smiled at her across the dinner table. Something that made her want to prove herself worthy of his regard. Was it love? Sarah didn't know. She'd never been in love before, had no reference point. But it was something real and growing stronger every day. When she returned to the ranch, full darkness had fallen. Crawford was waiting on the porch, his relief visible when he saw her. "I was starting to worry," he admitted. "Dutch found me." "We talked." Crawford's expression became guarded. "About what?" Sarah dismounted and led Maple toward the stable. "About choices. About knowing the full truth before making decisions." She glanced back at him. "About things that matter." She saw understanding dawn in his eyes. Dutch had told her. For a moment, Crawford looked almost vulnerable, uncertain in a way she'd never seen him. "Sarah, don't," she said gently. "Not yet. We made an agreement. 6 months, then we both decide. Let's honor that." Relief and something else, gratitude maybe, crossed his face. "All right. 6 more weeks." 6 more weeks, Sarah agreed. But as she cared for Maple in the stable, brushing the mare down and checking her hooves with the competence Dutch had taught her, Sarah realized something important. She was already making her choice, had been making it gradually over these 5 months. Every skill learned, every challenge overcome, every moment of partnership with Crawford, they were all small decisions pointing in the same direction. The question wasn't really whether she would stay. The question was whether she was brave enough to admit it to herself and to him. Inside the house, Rosa had dinner waiting. As Sarah washed up, the older woman caught her arm. "The Apache men who came today, they expected to find you broken or being mistreated, yes?" "Yes," Rosa smiled. "Instead, they found you strong, educated, respected. Sometimes the best revenge is success." She paused. "But you know staying here won't be easy. You'll face judgment for the rest of your life. I know. And you're considering it anyway. It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered it. I'm considering it. Rosa patted her arm. Good. This ranch needs someone with sense running it. Crawford's brilliant about cattle and terrible about everything else. You balance him. At dinner, Crawford was quieter than usual, clearly processing Dutch's revelation and Sarah's reaction. But when their eyes met across the table, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that the foundation was shifting, that they were approaching a point of no return. After dinner, Sarah sat with her reading lesson while Crawford worked on correspondence. The comfortable silence between them felt different now, charged with possibility and risk. Sarah, Crawford said suddenly, setting down his pen, regardless of what you decide in 6 weeks, I want you to know something. These past 5 months, teaching you, working with you, watching you grow into your capabilities, it's been the best time I've had since I started this ranch. You've made me remember why I built all this, given me a reason to care about its future, beyond just stubborn pride. Sarah's throat tightened. James, I'm not asking for an answer, just wanted you to know. He picked up his pen again. Now let's see if you can read this section on water rights law. It's dense, but you've handled worse. As Sarah bent over the complicated legal text, sounding out unfamiliar words and asking questions when she needed help, she felt something settle into place inside her. This partnership, mutual respect, working together toward common goals. This was what she'd been looking for her whole life, without knowing it had a name. The council had sent her here expecting her to fail. Instead, she'd found exactly where she belonged. Now she just had to find the courage to claim it. The final week arrived faster than Sarah expected. 6 months to the day since she'd walked 15 miles expecting rejection. She would need to give Crawford her answer, but first, there was something she needed to do. I want to visit my grandmother, Sarah told Crawford at breakfast on the Monday of that last week. Before I make my final decision, I need to see her. To talk with her. Crawford set down his coffee cup. Of course. When do you want to go? Tomorrow. And I need to go alone. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. Take Maple. She knows the route now. But Sarah, he hesitated. If you decide to stay there, I'll understand. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything, Sarah said quietly. You gave me a choice when no one else would. Whatever I decide, I need you to know that. The next morning, Sarah rode out before dawn. She wore one of her new dresses and the good boots, her hair braided with her grandmother's clasp. In her saddlebag, she carried gifts purchased with her own money, fabric for a new dress, real coffee, tobacco, sugar, and a warm wool blanket. Small luxuries her grandmother had never been able to afford. The ride to the Apache settlement took most of the morning. As Sarah approached, she saw people stopping their work to stare. Whispers followed her progress through the village. She rode straight to her grandmother's shelter and dismounted. Her grandmother emerged, moving slowly, her ancient eyes widening in shock. Sarah? Sarah embraced her, feeling how frail the old woman had become in just 6 months. Grandmother, I've missed you. Let me look at you. Her grandmother held her at arm's length, taking in the healthy glow of her skin, the quality of her clothing, the confidence in her bearing. Tears filled the old woman's eyes. You look like someone who has found herself. Inside the small shelter, Sarah unpacked her gifts, while her grandmother wept with gratitude. They talked for hours, Sarah describing everything she'd learned, the work she'd done, the respect she'd earned. Her grandmother listened with pride and wonder. The council expected you to fail, her grandmother said finally. Thomas Blackfeather has told everyone you would return in shame, proving that Apache girls have no place in the white man's world. I know what they expected. Sarah took her grandmother's weathered hands. But I need your wisdom now, grandmother. Crawford has offered me partnership, true partnership as his wife, with legal rights and equal say in the ranch. But accepting means living in both worlds and belonging fully to neither. I don't know what to do. Her grandmother was quiet for a long moment, her thumb rubbing circles on Sarah's hand. When your mother was your age, she had a choice between 2 men. One was Apache, handsome and traditional. The other was your father, half Mexican, half Apache, belonging nowhere completely. Everyone told her to choose the traditional path, the easier path, but she chose father. She chose the man who saw all of her, not just the parts that fit expectations. She chose the harder path because it was authentic. Her grandmother's eyes held Sarah's. You already know what you want, child. You're not here to ask permission. You're here to hear me say what you already understand, that you deserve to choose your own path, even if others judge you for it. I'm afraid, Sarah whispered, of failing, of not being enough. You walked 15 miles expecting nothing and built a life that gives you choices. You've already proven you're enough. Her grandmother squeezed her hands. And this Crawford, does he see you? Truly see you? Sarah thought about Crawford teaching her to read contracts, defending her honor to Thornton, trusting her with his business secrets, respecting her need to visit her grandmother before making a decision. Yes, he sees me. Then you have your answer. Her grandmother smiled. Go claim your life, Sarah. I'll be proud of you no matter what path you walk, but I'll be proudest knowing you chose it freely. As Sarah prepared to leave, word had spread through the settlement. A small crowd gathered, including Running Bear and Thomas Blackfeather. Sarah mounted Maple, sitting tall in the saddle, with the ease of someone who'd spent months learning to ride properly. Blackfeather stepped forward, his face twisted with contempt. So the white man's property returns to show off. Tell us, Sarah Whitehorse, what did you have to do to earn those fine clothes? The insult hung in the air. 6 months ago, Sarah would have lowered her eyes, accepted the shame he tried to heap on her. But she wasn't that girl anymore. I worked, Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying to the gathered crowd. I learned to manage a household of 20 people. I learned to ride, to care for horses, to understand business and law. I can read and write in English. I have money in a bank account under my own name, and I earned all of it through honest labor and respect. She looked directly at Blackfeather. You sent me to Crawford expecting me to fail, to be rejected, to learn my place. Instead, I found my worth. The question isn't what I had to do to earn these clothes. The question is, what did you accomplish in the 6 months you spent hoping I would fail? Blackfeather's face flushed with anger, but he had no response. Several people in the crowd murmured approvingly. Running Bear's expression was unreadable, but he nodded slightly. Acknowledgement, if not quite respect. Sarah turned Maple and rode away from the settlement, her grandmother's blessing warming her like sunlight. She knew she would return to visit, but she also knew she was leaving for the last time as a resident. Whatever happened next, the Apache settlement was no longer her home. The ranch was her home now. She rode hard, arriving at Crawford's ranch in the late afternoon. He was working with Dutch in the corral, but stopped immediately when he saw her returning. Sarah dismounted and walked to the fence, her heart pounding. I have my answer, she said without preamble. Crawford climbed over the fence, Dutch discreetly disappearing toward the barn. All right, I choose to stay. I choose partnership. I choose... Sarah took a breath. I choose you. If the offer still stands... Something broke open in Crawford's expression. Relief, joy, something tender that transformed his usually serious face. The offer stands. It'll always stand. He moved closer. Are you sure? Because once we do this, once we marry legally, you're tied to me and this ranch. There's no going back without significant consequences, I'm sure. I've been sure for weeks, maybe months. I just needed to hear my grandmother say I deserve to choose. Sarah smiled. So yes, James Crawford, I'll marry you. I'll be your partner in this ranch and in this life. Crawford closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. I'm going to do my best to make sure you never regret this choice. Then he kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper, months of restrained feelings finally released. When they broke apart, Sarah was breathless. Well, finally... Rosa's voice called from the porch. I thought you two would dance around each other forever. Over the next week, preparations moved quickly. Crawford rode to town and returned with Samuel Brennan, who prepared the marriage contract. True to his word, Crawford made Sarah a full partner, 50% ownership of the ranch. equal say in all business decisions, inheritance rights, everything legally protected. This is unusual, Brennan warned as Sarah signed the papers. Most men wouldn't give their wives this much legal power. Most men don't have Sarah's intelligence or work ethic, Crawford replied. This is a partnership. The papers should reflect that. The wedding itself was small. Dutch stood as Crawford's witness. Rosa stood as Sarah's. Samuel Brennan officiated. They married on the ranch, with the vast land stretching out behind them, the land they would now build together. Sarah wore a new dress Rosa had helped her make, white with blue embroidery. Crawford wore his best suit, the one reserved for important business meetings. When he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Sarah felt the weight of it, not as a chain, but as a promise. "You're Sarah Crawford now," Rosa said afterward, embracing her tightly. "The first Apache woman to own a ranch in this territory. You've made history." 3 days later, Sarah rode back to the Apache settlement one final time. She wore her wedding ring and carried the official marriage certificate. Her grandmother met her with tears of joy, but Sarah also visited the council lodge, where Running Bear and Thomas Blackfeather sat with the other elders. She walked in uninvited, her confidence stopping their conversation mid-sentence. "I came to inform the council that I have married James Crawford," Sarah said formally, "according to white law, with full legal rights and property ownership. I am now Sarah Crawford, co-owner of the largest successful ranch in this region." She pulled out the marriage certificate and property documents, laying them on the ground before the council. "You sent me as a test, expecting me to fail and prove that Apache women have no place in the white man's world. Instead, I proved that we can succeed anywhere if given the opportunity." Blackfeather's face was purple with rage, but Running Bear picked up the documents, studying them carefully. "These are real legal." "Yes, and I came to offer something to the council." Sarah kept her voice level. "My husband and I are willing to employ young people from this settlement who want to learn ranching, business, or English. We'll pay fair wages and teach valuable skills. We're willing to continue allowing peaceful passage across our land. And we're willing to trade fairly and honestly," she paused. "But this offer requires respect in return. Crawford is my husband and partner. I am his wife and equal. Anyone who insults either of us will find their access to our land and opportunities withdrawn. We're offering alliance, not subordination." Running Bear looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "The council will consider your offer." It wasn't enthusiastic acceptance, but it was acknowledgement. Sarah had forced them to see her not as the poor, disposable girl they'd sent away, but as a woman of property and power who could help or harm them depending on how they treated her. As she rode away from the settlement for what she knew might be the last time in months, Sarah felt a chapter closing and a new one beginning. She was Sarah Crawford now, Apache and rancher's wife. Traditional and modern, belonging to two worlds and fully to neither, but carving out her own space between them. When she returned to the ranch, to home, Crawford was waiting on the porch. He didn't ask how it went. He simply took her hand and led her inside, where Rosa had dinner waiting and Dutch had brought up a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. "To partnerships," Dutch toasted, raising his glass, "and to proving everyone wrong." "To Sarah," Crawford added, his eyes on his wife, "who walked 15 miles expecting rejection and ended up owning half of everything I've built." "To new beginnings," Rosa said firmly, "and to a future built on respect instead of assumptions." Sarah raised her glass, looking around at these people who had become her family, chosen family, earned family, real family, in all the ways that mattered. "To choices," she said quietly, "and to having the courage to make them." That night, as Sarah lay beside her husband in the house that was now legally half hers, she thought about the poor Apache girl the council had sent as a test. That girl would have been terrified by everything that had happened. But Sarah Crawford, educated, propertied, partnered, was only excited. The council had sent her expecting her to return with nothing. Instead, she had returned with everything, including the one thing they never thought she deserved: Crawford's name. legally bound and impossible to take away. And that, Sarah thought as sleep finally claimed her, was the best revenge of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.